In the fluorescent glow of an open-plan office, she sits with a smile so constant it seems painted on, her voice a melody of accommodating phrases. "Of course, I'll handle that. No problem at all. Whatever you need." Her colleagues call her the sweetest person they've ever known, the one who never says no, who remembers every birthday, who volunteers for every thankless task. Yet behind that seamless warmth, something coils in the shadows, something that even she barely acknowledges. A resentment so deeply buried it is calcified into something far more dangerous than anger. This is the paradox that Carl Jung warned us about centuries after philosophers first glimpsed its shape, that the brightest light often casts the darkest shadow, and that the nicest people among us may be harboring the most volatile storms. We've all encountered them, haven't we? The friend who never expresses a contrary opinion, who agrees with everything you say with such eagerness it feels less like harmony and more like hunger. The partner who sacrifices endlessly, never asking for anything, until one day they explode in a fury that seems to come from nowhere. Except it didn't come from nowhere. It came from everywhere, from every swallowed word and suppressed need, from every performance of pleasantness that demanded something be surrendered at the altar of approval. Niceness, we're taught, is a virtue. But what if the relentless pursuit of being nice has a shadow side that nobody warned us about? What if the compulsion to please is not generosity but a prison, not kindness but a slow-burning form of self-destruction that eventually consumes everyone in its radius? Picture Vienna in the early 20th century, where Sigmund Freud first peeled back the layers of the human psyche to reveal the seething unconscious beneath. His protege and eventual rival, Carl Jung, took this excavation deeper into territories Freud dared not tread. Jung gave us the concept of the shadow, that repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, the desires we deem unacceptable, the anger we cannot express, the selfishness we pretend doesn't exist. Everyone carries a shadow, Jung wrote, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The nice person, in their relentless effort to be good, to be liked, to be beyond reproach, casts perhaps the longest shadow of all. For in denying their own darkness, they do not eliminate it, they merely drive it underground where it grows teeth. Consider the child who learns early that love is conditional, that affection flows only when they are agreeable, helpful, invisible in their needs. This child, desperate for connection, constructs a self designed for approval, a self that smiles when it wants to scream, that says yes when every fiber yearns to say no, that performs kindness not from abundance but from terror of abandonment. This child grows into an adult who cannot distinguish between genuine generosity and compulsive people-pleasing, between authentic warmth and the desperate transaction of niceness for acceptance. They become the coworker who never sets boundaries, the friend who absorbs everyone's problems while denying their own, the partner who gives and gives until there's nothing left, and then wonders why they feel so hollow, so invisible, so silently enraged. The psychology of this pattern runs deep into our neural architecture. When we suppress emotions repeatedly, the amygdala, our brain's alarm system, doesn't simply quiet down. It remains activated, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, keeping us in a perpetual state of low-grade stress. The nice person, always monitoring for disapproval, always calibrating their responses to please, lives in a chronic state of hypervigilance. Their nervous system never fully relaxes, because safety depends not on their own sense of worth, but on the constantly shifting approval of others. This is exhausting, and exhaustion breeds resentment. The resentment, forbidden from conscious expression, leaks out in passive-aggressive barbs, in forgetting important things, in a certain coldness that contradicts the warm words, or it erupts catastrophically when the pressure finally exceeds the container's capacity. Flash forward to a dinner party in contemporary London where Marcus, a therapist in his 50s, watches a familiar dynamic unfold. His friend Elaine, ever the gracious hostess, flutters between guests with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She deflects every compliment, insists she's fine really, when asked how she's doing, and volunteers to clean up alone despite offers of help. Later, in the quiet of the kitchen, Marcus catches her gripping the counter, knuckles white, jaw clenched, a glimpse of the volcano beneath the pleasant surface. He's seen this pattern hundreds of times in his practice. The person so committed to being perceived as good that they've lost touch with who they actually are. They don't know what they want, because wanting feels dangerous. They don't know what they feel because feeling was never safe. They've become a performance of a person, and the performer is exhausted. Nietzsche, that relentless interrogator of morality, would recognize Elaine immediately. In his dissection of what he called slave morality, Nietzsche identified a particular kind of goodness that emerges not from strength, but from weakness, not from genuine virtue, but from suppressed will to power. The person who cannot assert themselves, who fears their own desires, reframes their impotence as moral superiority. I am good because I am not aggressive, they tell themselves. Because I put others first, because I never make demands. But Nietzsche saw through this self-deception. He recognized that such niceness often conceals what he called resentment, a festering bitterness toward those who seem to live more freely, who take up space, who dare to want. The nice person, prohibited from direct expression of their needs, becomes an expert in indirect warfare. The sigh that communicates disappointment without stating it, the favor done with just enough martyrdom to induce guilt, the sweetness that somehow always leaves a bitter aftertaste. This is where niceness curdles into something more insidious, covert aggression. Unlike the overt bully whose hostility is visible and therefore addressable, the covertly aggressive nice person operates in shadows and plausible deniability. They wound with kindness, control with generosity, punish with withdrawal, and if confronted, they retreat into injured innocence. I was only trying to help, they say, and the accusation dies on the accuser's lips, replaced by doubt and guilt. This is the dark art of the chronically nice. They've learned that direct power is dangerous and visible, so they've mastered indirect power. The kind that operates through obligation, through guilt, through the accumulated weight of unreciprocated sacrifices. Their generosity becomes a ledger, their kindness a debt you didn't know you were incurring. The philosopher and psychologist Erich Fromm distinguished between what he called productive and unproductive orientations toward life. Productive love, productive work, productive giving. These flow from a sense of inner abundance, from a self that is secure enough to genuinely care for others without losing itself in the process. Unproductive orientations, by contrast, are driven by anxiety, by a fundamental insecurity that seeks constant reassurance from the external world. The compulsive nice person often operates from this unproductive place. Their giving is not overflow but deficit spending, not generosity but bargaining. They give to be loved, to be needed, to be protected from the terrifying possibility that they might be abandoned if they showed their true face. This is not kindness, it is a transaction disguised as a gift, and eventually, the other party senses the hidden price tag. In the laboratories of modern psychology, researchers have given this pattern clinical names: codependency, pathological altruism, covert narcissism. The last term may seem shocking. How can the selfless nice person be narcissistic? But narcissism at its core is not about confidence or self-love. It's about a fragile sense of self that requires constant external validation. The overt narcissist demands admiration through grandiosity. The covert narcissist demands it through victimhood and self-sacrifice. "Look how much I do for everyone," the covert narcissist whispers. "Look how I suffer. How could anyone question my goodness?" This is the shadow side of niceness taken to its extreme. An identity so dependent on being seen as good that it cannot tolerate any evidence to the contrary, that reacts with fury or collapse when the performance is questioned. Picture a family dinner in suburban America, where tensions simmer beneath the Thanksgiving turkey. The mother, who has spent her entire life being the family's emotional center, the one who remembers, who mediates, who sacrifices, watches as her adult children scroll through their phones, barely acknowledging the meal she spent 3 days preparing. Something shifts in her face, a micro-expression of pain that quickly smooths into practiced warmth. "It's fine," she says when someone finally notices her silence. "I'm just tired." But it's not fine, and it's not just tiredness. It's decades of unspoken needs, of performing motherhood rather than inhabiting it, of believing that her worth depended on her usefulness. Now, with the children grown and her role diminished, she confronts the void she's been fleeing her entire life, the terrifying question of who she is when she's not needed, when she's not serving, when she's not nice. Jung would counsel this woman, and all of us who recognize ourselves in her, to begin the uncomfortable process he called shadow integration. This is not about becoming cruel or selfish. It's about acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience that lives within us. The capacity for anger is not the same as violence. It's the energy that protects boundaries and asserts worth. The capacity for selfishness is not the same as narcissism. It's the recognition that we cannot pour from an empty cup, that our needs matter too. The nice person's shadow contains all the qualities they've exiled: assertiveness, desire, healthy self-interest, the ability to say no without drowning in guilt. Integration means welcoming these exiled parts home, not to let them run wild, but to bring them into the light where they can be examined, understood, and expressed appropriately. The path out of compulsive niceness begins with a radical act: telling the truth. Not cruel honesty wielded as a weapon, but authentic communication that honors both self and other. I'm feeling overwhelmed instead of I'm fine. I need some time alone instead of volunteering for yet another task. That comment hurt me instead of smiling through the wound. This is terrifying for the person whose entire sense of safety has been built on accommodation, but it's also liberating. Every authentic no creates space for an authentic yes. Every expressed need teaches others how to actually love us, rather than how to use us. Every owned anger prevents the slow poisoning of resentment. Consider the transformation of David, a middle-aged accountant who spent 40 years being the nice guy, the reliable friend, the accommodating colleague, the partner who never made waves. He came to therapy after his wife left, citing his passivity, his lack of presence, his infuriating agreeableness. "She wanted me to fight for her," he said, bewildered, "but I was raised to never fight." The work of therapy became the work of excavation, unearthing the anger he'd buried since childhood, the dreams he'd surrendered for safety, the voice he'd silenced in exchange for approval. Slowly, David learned to assert himself, to tolerate the anxiety of others' displeasure, to discover preferences he'd never allowed himself to have. He became, paradoxically, both less nice and more kind, less performatively pleasant and more genuinely present. The difference was authenticity. He now gives from choice rather than compulsion, and his giving carries the warmth of true generosity rather than the chill of covert transaction. The ancient Taoists understood this balance intuitively. Lao Tzu spoke of the Tao as containing both yin and yang, light and shadow, giving and receiving in eternal dance. To be only giving, only soft, only accommodating is to be out of balance with the natural order, and nature always corrects imbalances, often painfully. The wise person in Taoist philosophy knows when to yield and when to stand firm, when to give and when to receive, when to speak and when to remain silent. This is not the rigid niceness of the people-pleaser, but the fluid responsiveness of the integrated self, a self that includes its own shadow, that can access its own power, that serves others from overflow rather than deficit. In our modern world, the cult of niceness has reached fever pitch. Social media rewards the performance of positivity, the careful curation of an agreeable self. We're taught that negative emotions are failures, that boundaries are selfish, that the highest virtue is being liked by everyone. But this is a prescription for psychological fragmentation, for lives lived in the exhausting gap between who we perform and who we are. The backlash, when it comes, and it always comes, takes forms ranging from burnout to rage to the quiet devastation of realizing you've spent your life being someone else's idea of good rather than your own idea of whole. Friedrich Nietzsche challenged us to move beyond the simplistic morality of good and evil into a more nuanced understanding of human flourishing. What he called the will to power is not about domination, but about self-actualization, about becoming who you truly are rather than who others need you to be. The nice person, trapped in the prison of others' approval, has surrendered their will to power, not to something higher, but to fear. Recovery means reclaiming that power, not to wield against others, but to finally stand in the fullness of one's own being. As our office worker from the opening scene finally begins her own awakening, she discovers something unexpected, that people actually like her more when she's real. Her boundaries, far from pushing others away, create respect. Her expressed needs, far from burdening relationships, allow for genuine reciprocity. Her occasional no makes her yes meaningful. She's still kind, perhaps more truly kind than before, but she's no longer nice in that desperate, self-erasing way. She's learned what Jung knew, what Nietzsche preached, what the Taoists embodied. That wholeness requires shadow, that strength includes vulnerability, and that the most dangerous person is not the one who shows their darkness, but the one who refuses to admit it exists. So I leave you with this reflection as the lights dim and the credits of this meditation begin to roll. Examine your own niceness. Is it the genuine warmth of a self that is secure and whole? Or is it the performance of a self that fears its own needs, its own anger, its own legitimate desires? Do you give from abundance or from the desperate hope that if you give enough you'll finally be loved? Can you say no without drowning in guilt, express displeasure without terror of abandonment, take up space without apologizing for existing? The shadow doesn't disappear when we refuse to look at it. It grows. It festers. It emerges in ways we can't control, in passive aggression, in sudden rages, in the silent treatment, in the accumulated resentments that poison our closest relationships. But when we turn toward the shadow with curiosity rather than fear, when we integrate rather than exile, we discover something remarkable, that our darkness, acknowledged and owned, becomes a source of depth rather than destruction. The nice person who befriends their shadow becomes something far more valuable than nice. They become real. And in that realness lies the possibility of genuine connection, authentic love, and the peace that comes from finally, at long last, being home in your own skin. The choice, as it always has been, is yours. Will you continue the performance, smiling through the pain, agreeing through the resentment, giving until you're hollow? Or will you dare the terrifying, liberating act of being whole, shadow and all? Jung whispered the answer across the decades. I'd rather be whole than good. Perhaps it's time we listened.